What's up, everybody? A big day in crypto. I'm your host, CoinDesk Guzman, coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York, as we're watching the charts. One of the crazier days as breaking news, I think that's fair to say, as we get a break from the thinking around the ETH ETFs. The Bloomberg boys out saying now that potentially we could see 75% chance of approval this week as we approach the deadline. That's up from a 25% chance they ascribe to the approval of those ETH ETF applications. And we're seeing Bitcoin pop up to a new high since the halvening as it flirts with 70K. And on the other side, we're watching Ethereum pop 11% off that news. That is the big swing. And perhaps not surprising, but perhaps a little bit, given the fact that so many people had already said that this was basically a moot point, that it was dead on arrival, including, by the way, the Bloomberg boys as much as 3 days ago were just saying that, look, this isn't going to happen. And now today, go ahead and bring up the tweet of what we're watching play out, because, again, I think most everybody did assume that this one was a done deal, that the SEC was going to deny these two applications, the first ones due this week, and now a U-turn from 25% approval odds to 75%. Reason being, it's what those reporters, of course, Balchunas and Seyffart. Seyfart's been on the show before. Texas got these tweets up right now. But essentially, a 180 from everything that they had been hearing from issuers, now saying that this is happening in real time. We're hearing the same thing from Eleanor Terrett, friend of the show, over from Fox Biz as well. And that is the reason why we're seeing this swing of 11% on Ethereum. Keep in mind, though, 75% is not 100%. What we saw play out in the Bitcoin ETF approvals versus what's playing out this time, it should not be lost in terms of what we saw last week, right? What went down in Washington, D.C., essentially a bipartisan rebuke of the way that Gary Gensler has been running the SEC. That potentially is one of the driving factors here when you think about why so close to potentially denying spot ETH ETFs. They could be rethinking that position if you do have Washington, D.C. up in arms, to now President Biden having to potentially veto that bill that passed both the House and Senate. So this could be real political pressure that's now forcing Gary Gensler's SEC to reconsider what had already been a done deal in denying these ETH ETFs and opening themselves up to, again, potentially a lawsuit like we saw with the Bitcoin ETF approvals that came only after Grayscale sued the SEC and won on appeal. So that's what's happening here, and I think it is pretty interesting to go back to the tweet, Texas, if we still have this here, just talking about that increase from 25% to 75%. Again, as I said, by no means saying that this is definitely going to happen, but the deadlines are coming up. When you think about the first two that were due for a decision, that was both VanEck, which is on May 23rd, and Ark Invest 21 shares the following day on May 24th. So not a lot of time. This is happening this week. I should also note, Texas, if we go back to our rundown, we're going to be talking a little bit about the political wins, because that definitely, I think, is a driving force of what we're seeing here. Two other huge votes in the House when it comes to FIT 121, looking at the, I guess, technically in that vote, that one is an issue around what's going to happen with the regulatory piece. FIT 21, I should say, not 121, though. SOB 121, mixing up all of our votes in D.C. But FIT 21 has more to do about the regulatory path for crypto assets and a huge attempt by the House to really get something done before the election. And also a bill on CBDCs and blocking Congress, or blocking the Fed, rather, the government from issuing a CBDC. So both of those things going on. That's the news that we're starting with on this show. Just to be clear, huge news. We'll continue to bring up developments. And I was just chatting with James Seyffart because we had a guest who was going to come on today and bail, because all this stuff is happening in real time. But we'll keep you updated on those. By the way, shout out to, this was another one, Texas, before here, the Coinbase analyst, by the way. A lot of people were saying, look, this is an easy thing to call out. If you were playing, by the way, the Ethereum, Grayscale Ethereum Trust, that one's popping like 20% today. That would have been a good place to play if you were watching it, basically because you had nothing to lose by calling for this. If you were saying that the market was underestimating the approval odds, you could be wrong and no one would give you any flack, because guess what? It was already kind of priced in. Everyone assumed that this wouldn't get approved. But now, if it gets flipped, you look like a genius. So shout out to the Coinbase analyst, David Hahn, who came out and said that because his bet paid off. He looks like a genius because he was ahead of everybody on this one. So mismatch leaves room for surprises to the upside. We are seeing a surprise today. But again, nothing fully concrete yet. So we'll continue to track that and see what happens ahead of those deadlines. Elsewhere, though, outside of that, huge debate now on the other side of the coin, no pun intended, as we watch Bitcoin continue its adoption track. Of course, it's been a few months since Bitcoin ETFs were approved to trade back in January. And again, we're seeing money start to pour in, but maybe not enough to, I guess, appease everybody. In Texas, you had a bit of the chart from Jim Bianco looking at a lot of the 13F filings, course, from a lot of the funds that have now had to disclose that they've put money into these Bitcoin ETFs. We've seen a lot of them, a lot of these filings for Q1, and we're talking billions of dollars that have been basically accounted for from some of these funds that have now told everyone, look, we are invested in these Bitcoin ETFs. And it's pretty interesting. I mean, when you look at it, those are the percentages, and we're going to play a clip from Jim because he's still not satisfied. Keep in mind, Jim is not one of those guys who's super anti-crypto. He's actually pro-crypto, I think, in terms of what Bitcoin represents for an alternative to the old traditional financial system. But he is very concerned, and I just want to play some of those concerns because I think it is interesting to dig into, all right, how far are we in some of these firms and advisors? We've talked so long about how these wealth advisors may be pitching Bitcoin ETFs to their clients, but is that actually happening? And when you look at the 13Fs, maybe not as much as we would have thought. It's mostly, if we go back to that little table you had there, mostly hedge funds still in terms of reporting on these 13Fs, who's actually holding the Bitcoin ETFs. Mostly hedge funds and maybe a few others, but not so much when it comes to those advisors yet. And just want to play what Jim shared with my good friend Julia LaRoche on her podcast not too long ago. Take a listen.
Less than 1% of the Bitcoin ETF is in wealth managers' hands. 25% of it is GLD is in wealth managers' hands. Less than 1 for the Bitcoin ETF. If you look at alternative assets like the high yield one, it's 75% is in wealth managers' hands, less than 1. That means 99.5% of those assets are not in boomer wealth managers' hands. And what I'm worried about is that they're stuck in paper-handed degens. And my concern is you're losing the narrative. And if you're going to lose the narrative, it's going to be very disappointing.
Now, my, I guess, rebuttal to all of that might be that you got to give it some time. And I don't know if it's going to be 4 months in terms of when all of this will happen. We've, of course, been watching, and we've heard from a lot of guests in terms of how many questions maybe Main Street America, maybe those boomers do have about Bitcoin, how much they need to flush out of their system in terms of all the negative headlines they've heard for the past year and where we're at now. And, you know, it's not like it's going to happen overnight. And so I get the concerns around what happens if you do lose the narrative around these ETFs have gotten approved. Now, you know, the floodgates are open. So much money is going to flow into Bitcoin. And, you know, that potentially is playing out right now with the ETH ETFs. And it's a shot in the arm for maybe the next wave of people putting money into crypto ETFs if these ones do get approved. But pretty interesting because you've had other people take the other side and say too much money has gone into Bitcoin. There's not going to be anything left for your funds that might be interested in crypto to allocate anything to ETH ETFs if they get approved now. There were actually, weirdly, some people, maybe it was, you know, what is it, Schadenfreude syndrome? Maybe some people who were looking for the ETH ETF to get denied so more time could pass before maybe those same funds could allocate to ETH ETFs at the end of the year instead of now in May. And so when you look at it that way, you could convince yourself that it's a lose-lose either way. But I think it is interesting to look at and track how quickly we are in that adoption cycle because I think there is still a long way to run. And if you look at the rest, I would encourage everybody to check out the thread from Jim. But if you look at the rest of the thread, you know, purchasing price in terms of people who have allocated to these ETFs is around 58 to 59K. And now, I mean, if we're at 70K, those people are still in the green and pretty strongly in the green. And so if they're not mainstream America, and they are just mostly hedge funds who may be hedging their other crypto holdings, you know, maybe you're not going to see the same cadence that we would have seen from people saying, oh, wow, I'm already up, significantly on my investment, maybe you should check out Bitcoin ETFs or anything like that. But still, I think a long room to run and very serious concerns potentially being raised from Jim Bianco on Julia Roche's podcast. I'd check that out if you haven't listened to it yet. Shout out to Julia Roche, my former Yahoo Finance colleague. Outside of that, though, let's think about altcoin season, because there's another huge thread going around this weekend before all the ETH ETF potential changes here, which we'll again highlight if you're just joining the show in this live recording right now. But outside of it, a lot of people have been looking at, all right, if ETH pops, what does that mean for altcoins and the rest of everything beyond ETH? And over the weekend, you had Hasib, managing partner from Dragonfly, talking about this in a really long thread about low float, high fully diluted value coins. And Texas, I think you have this chart that looks better when you pull it up than when I do. But just kind of tracking where some of these coins are relative to, I guess, where they launched. And most of them are down. And a lot of people have really pushed the narrative that VCs get these tokens and they slowly dump on retail over the course of time as these unlocks happen. And it's bad for everybody. So what should we do to fix that? In the end of this thread, he says basically nothing. We shouldn't fix it because it's not necessarily a problem, because, this will happen regardless. And even other coins are down. And if you compare it to those, ones that have been around since the last cycle, it's not too crazy. I don't disagree with that take, by the way. When you compare some of these coins, it does look ugly on this chart, though, Texas. We have this one. You can look at Bitcoin and where it is versus all these other, low float tokens, and it doesn't look good on the chart. So yes, it does push that narrative of people are dumping on you. But you got to remember, Bitcoin has enjoyed the huge money that's flown in through these ETFs, which is why we're seeing ETH pop today. So in general, I think it's important to remind yourself, if you're new to this game, you got Bitcoin, you got ETH, and you got everything else. And just be careful with everything else. But very interesting to think about now, if ETH can rally beyond Bitcoin, what that does to the altcoins. And generally in the cycle, this far past the halving, it's not too far from the time where most historical cycles would tell you it's altcoin season. So I don't want to call it right now, but I will say some of the calls that I've made on this show have panned out thus far. I'm feeling a little hot, Texas. So I might say we're within potentially a few weeks of the beginning of altcoin season. And maybe that's worth remembering. Why right now, leading our site, if you go over to coinage.media, we are recirculating the call from Sean Farrell back in April, when he doubled down on saying that Solana will hit $500 to $600 on the year. So just shouting that one out too, in terms of maybe potentially one of the biggest coins to keep your eyes on in 2024. Beyond that though, Texas, maybe it's worth going on to our next topic, which of course has nothing to do with altcoins, but more to do with bankruptcies, because there's no shortage of those to keep track on. And this one's just a real quick one to note. By the way, shout out Michael Sonnenschein, stepping down at Grayscale, no longer the CEO. They're bringing in a guy who used to run things at Goldman, I believe. And it's interesting that that announcement came out on the same day where we are seeing a settlement among Genesis and the New York State Attorney General in that back and forth around the bankruptcy. $2 billion is the settlement in that one, as I try and bring up this headline for us all, because a lot of people are tied up in this case, including Gemini. It was a public back and forth between the Winklevoss twins and Barry Silbert, and now it's finally done, basically, as no one admits they were at fault, which is usual in these settlements, but $2 billion in the agreement between the New York State Attorney General's office and Genesis, $2 billion, and I think the main takeaway is that potentially the payout on this will be about 77% in terms of the claims. Importantly, that will not include DCG, of course, the company that was also tied up in all this and owner in Grayscale. So that is the update on that front, and potentially maybe one of the last bankruptcies to really bring updates on, depending on what happens with BlockFi as well. But I'm really hoping to just get past all of these crypto lenders and the bankruptcies that have really stacked up over and over and over again. And I think I speak for the whole market on that one too. Lastly, as we look ahead to the rest of the week, it's important to highlight what's going to be happening down in Washington, D.C. I want to bring up this tweet from the House Financial Services, GOP. The two main votes to keep your eyes on going to be, as I said, FIT 21. That act is looking into the regulatory pathway for crypto in this country, basically removing it from whatever Gary Gensler and the SEC want to do into actually laying out, hey, here's how your token can maybe not be a security. Pretty important vote, that one, to really build on the rally of what we saw play out last week with the bipartisan rebuke of the SEC rule staff accounting bulletin 121. We've already highlighted that. And now another huge vote in the House. On top of that, there's also the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act. So both of those happening this week. It's going to be busy in the House for crypto fans. I think based on the last week, we might take that vote live and show you exactly where your state representatives fall on the issue, because the last vote got 21 Democrats, I'm pretty sure, in the House. If that number is higher, I think it really does show kind of how this has not just been a Republican-fueled endeavor, that some Democrats actually want a pathway for crypto in the U.S. as well. This is a national security issue that has reached a new level in the United States. And so it'll be a rather important vote to keep our eyes on as we continue covering all of this. I also want to get back to the charts here, Texas, because I think that's pretty much going to do it. I wish we had someone else on here, but hopefully that has helped everyone understand what the hell's happening in crypto this week and happened over the weekend. But we are still watching. I mean, when we came on, Ethereum was 11% up on the day, still basically there. I would again caution everyone, because if you played like me, if you procrastinated on getting into Grayscale's Ethereum Trust, and again, this isn't financial advice, but if you were late, that used to be about a 20% discount as early as this morning. And that discount obviously is going to close when it's up 20% on the day. Let's bring it up actually over here, Texas. Let me see if I can bring up the Grayscale Ethereum Trust. ETHE is the ticker on that one. When it's up 25% on the day and you've got Ethereum up 11% on the day, you don't need to be a genius to know that the discount is closing on that one. So just be careful, because these odds can flip rather quickly. And again, the Bloomberg boys are not saying that this is a guaranteed lock like the Bitcoin ETFs were of January this year. They're merely saying odds have tripled, which again is actually pretty big deal and why we're seeing Ethereum pop, but it's definitely not a lock. So just be careful would be my caution if you were late to the trade, which I procrastinated, too much going on, didn't get in. But if you did, congratulations, because you called that one, much like that Coinbase analyst, in saying that, look, there's more to be gained than to be lost on this one. So we'll keep tabs on that, the developments in Washington, D.C., a bit of everything on this Coinage News recap. But that will most likely do it for us on this one. As always, you can check out the biggest headlines in crypto at coinage.media and join our project to co-own this with us alongside the co-founder of Netflix. For everybody here at Coinage and myself, that'll do it for us. Stay tuned for more coming to you this week. We're going to be chatting with Perry Ann Boring about those wins in Washington, D.C., and digging deeper into the stablecoin wars with Athena Labs and their stablecoin and their tech. But until then, we'll see you soon.